Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult, video 164, Dream Interpretation and Opposites in Literature, because I'm editing a work right now and I'm 4/5 of the way through it, so it's getting towards done. And the dream interpretation part I'm almost completely done with. I think there's one more page to go through. It covers dream interpretation heavily. It's called The New Fortune Teller and Dream Book. It's really more Dream Book than anything else, although it does contain a very, very simplified oraculum. I can't wait to include that in a booklet I'm going to be writing on the subject of these particular styles of works, how they intertwine from the perspective of literary history. But I thought it was an important thing to point out, which is that in dream interpretation prior to the maybe late pre-modern period, maybe the Victorian or Roaring Twenties periods, dream interpretation often heavily relied on the concept of opposites. I guess the idea was that the subconscious that comes forth in dreams should be roughly opposite, in a symbolic sense, what you would actually make of something in reality. So in the real world, if you found, like, buried treasure, you'd be happy, I would assume. You would say, well, I'm rich now, look at all the gold and silver and jewels and stuff like that. Yeah, you found something really great. But in dream interpretation, if you look at most of the oracle books, the dream books, and those that overlap, where they talk about dream interpretation, treasure in the traditions back then especially, and in a few now at least as well, they relate to actually the inverted meaning, which is it's sort of Plutonian. Of course, in ancient times, buried treasure was considered to be ruled by Hades, or Pluto, the god of death. It's considered actually a forerunner of great disappointment. To find treasure in your dream is actually the reverse of good. It basically means the opposite. It means poverty and misery and despair and sickness and decrepitude. Likewise, there's an interesting situation. I've seen this in I think 3 different dream books that I've gone through, edited and or read, from the pre-modern period, prior to the Victorian era roughly, usually in the 19th century. They were very, very common then, and in the late 1700s as well. Marriage and death are exactly opposite in these books. That is, to get married in your dream means death, not necessarily your own. It could be the death of a friend or a near relative. Dying in your dream, or seeing a corpse or something, is often related to marriage. That is, the idea is that the old self has died, you're now a married man or woman, therefore the symbol is actually apt. Likewise, to see marriage, it's sort of the passing away of the old as well, and so it betokens death in some way. And so they're actually seen as symbolic opposites. Oftentimes, something that you would generally consider cheery, like hearing singing, is a forerunner of disappointment, according to the new Dream Book, as well as others, I believe, as well. I think the Philosophical Merlin, if I remember correctly, has dream interpretation. Sometimes they kind of run together because they rip each other off, honestly. I think the new Dream Book came first, actually, 4 or 5 years before the Philosophical Merlin was written, which is also interesting. Now, it comes before Napoleon's Oraculum, I believe, too. That was 1850s, I believe. I think the first oracle was in the 1820s, though, and it's from the same exact publisher, if I remember correctly, as the Philosophical Merlin, a la the then British Empire. But these books were quite common. And in the older traditions, that's what it meant. Also, if you read through them, there's something else interesting. That is that in older occult works that touch on dream interpretation, everything is usually very pragmatic. It tells you, this is what this dream means for someone in love, someone going on a voyage, someone who's in trades, for a farmer. A lot of farm references, by the way, in all of these works. Very important. More than half the population were farmers at the time. Small family farmers. Naturally, it was important to cater to that, uprising literary audience as they gained marginal literacy across the more developed parts of the world. Prior, in some cases, even to the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. But things were getting better. Oh, look at this new loom. It's like 10% faster. I can knit 2 sweaters a week with this baby. That was great. And if you look at these things, they're very pragmatic. It's like, this will cause death. This means that something will happen. It's almost more of a fortune teller. If you look at dream interpretation now, though, it's often very symbolic and psychological. It's telling you, like, sort of what your innermost feelings are based on your dreams, and going into, well, you may be longing for a father figure. This means you have, maybe you have money stress or something. It's very symbolic. It was not very symbolic in the old times. It was more of a fortune teller by what you saw in your dreams. It was wildly different. Also, interestingly enough, back then, people usually interrupted their sleep. They'd go to sleep when the sun went down, wake up around midnight for an hour or two and pray and read and, fuck or eat or whatever, have a late night meal. So a midnight snack, literally, then they'd go back to sleep till dawn. Honestly enough, it's actually odd. The entire sleeping pattern in the 2 centuries since a lot of these works were made, it's entirely different in most parts of the world because of electric lighting and things like that. We've actually screwed up our own, sort of sleep states, and dream states as well probably follow along. There has to be a physical effect on it. People should try adopting the old sleep patterns, I guess, if they want to do prophecy or something. Maybe it'd be more authentic. I wonder if many occultists actually do that. Come to think of it, I'm not sure. I've never asked anybody. I should probably do that for some people. I'm sure somebody's got to have experimented with it. But it's actually fascinating. Like dream interpretation, I'm not sure that I put a lot of stock into it, per se. I can look at my dreams and I can go through these books and roughly match them up. But then you've got situations where sometimes 2 meanings overlap. Like there's a section in the new dream book that covers swimming. And part of that is if you're swimming with your head below water and, taking on water or something, then it means this. But they've also got a separate section on drowning. Then they've also got a separate entry for water itself, if you see water of a certain quality. So what if the meanings cancel each other out? Clear water is supposed to be great. What if you're swimming in clear water but you're also drowning at the time? Well then, then it could have a different meaning, and then other things could be peripheral to that, let's say you're swimming and you're singing at the same time. Well, swimming with your head above water is generally, it's a good thing, and you'll marry your sweetheart and get money and stuff like that. But then at the same time you're singing, and that's a negative meaning, so then, you're not supposed to get those things. So in some cases, you can actually have a contradictory reading if you have a more complex dream. Something beyond a simple flashing dream where for 10 seconds you're swimming or whatever. That could be definitely problematic for these works to actually keep in mind. Whereas with the more symbolic dream interpretation you have now, there's a greater scope of meanings that you can derive, and it's not necessary that they necessarily contradict in their form. I just thought that was an interesting subject. Some people wanted me to cover the Dyatlov Pass, but the thing is, of course, that's more in depth because it's a historical event. And because it's not really occult in nature, I decided to put it off. Do something that was more strictly occult, mystic in nature. Dream interpretation, definitely right up there. And it's something that has importance within psychology. It's not just the mystic, the occult. In the spiritual sense, it's also the psychological sense that matters. Now, of course, not being a huge believer in sort of the symbolism and dream interpretation in the psychological sense, I honestly would rather relegate it as a fortune-telling system. I think that's quite interesting. In this book that I'm working on, which I'll be announcing in a few days, it'll be done. Once it is, I'll have my entries on the blogs and so forth here. I would say at the same time, very interesting work so far, and it has, again, other entries in it. Fortune telling by cards in a simplified manner, and then of course the simplified oracle, and then prognostication by moles, which was considered very, very interesting and important back then. Now it's fallen almost completely out of favor, except for the little the little aside that people say, well, if you have a mole here on some part of your body, it means that's how you died in the past life. So if you have a mole on your forehead, probably get shot in the head. If you have a mole on your side, maybe get stabbed in the side. Maybe you have a mole on your elbow. Maybe you had cancer in your elbow or something. And so people kind of joke around about that. That's about all. Peace out.